Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Megan.
Hello. Hi. Hi there, Judy.
Hello.
Hi. So I'm excited for today's podcast.
I am as well. This is going to be a fun one.
So just to introduce you guys, over right here we've got Judy Grisell. She is a PhD professor whose research is pretty much determining the root cause of drug addiction. She's a behavioral neuroscientist. So for those of you who know us, we love those. With expertise in pharmacology and genetics. And like I said, we're going to be talking.
The food's here. Oh my God, I'll be right back.
Talking about addiction.
I will be back.
Sorry,
The food is here.
I just got an
My
alert
brain
that
says,
scared
this
me
is keto.
so much.
This is good.
So yeah,
Great
Judy
name.
Grisell, is going to be talking to us today about her book, Never Enough, which I read every second of through audio. And if you guys are audio nerds, that's a really good way to consume it because she actually reads it herself. She does the audiobook herself. So she's got an awesome voice, and you guys are going to be graced with her presence here on her podcast.
Thanks. That's nice of you to say. It was actually terrifying to read it. It was a funny story. They, I don't know if the editor got a few people to try out, and I was listening. My friends were listening to it with me, and they said, well, that person sounds really old and really sweet, and that's not you, which I was happy about. So, and then also there were a few words that were complicated. So I thought, how hard can it be? I can just read this thing. It was really hard. It's like driving a bullet train, on a greased rail for 2 days straight or 2.5 days at 300 miles an hour. I got home. I was so exhausted. I said to my husband, I don't want to eat dinner. I just want to go to bed. Really tiring, amazing tiring. So I'm glad you think it sounded okay.
It sounds awesome.
That's kind of an interesting segue into some of your research, which is the balancing of how there was so much stress in reading those books and doing that for such long periods of time. Because from what I understand, those when you're narrating that, it's just like a couple days and you're in the studio for 8 hours, right? Just reading the book over and over again so they can have all of the takes. That sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it's actually I didn't read it over and over again. I would read it once, and then every time, my stomach made a little noise or I breathed too loud or something, there was people listening in the background. They'd be like, hold on, stop, do that again. So it's just the amount of concentration. I think, when you read yourself, you're kind of stuttering and it doesn't bother you, but I guess you don't want to have that for other people. So anyway, I lived through it.
Yeah,
for sure.
It sounds great. It's the first thing I tell everybody. I'm like, if you have the option and if you don't like reading physically, you need to listen to the audiobook because her voice will definitely, in a good way, put you to sleep. It's just so soothing. And then you're over here talking about a Coke binge that you had when you were back in your teens. And I'm like, this is just this is crazy hilarious to listen to, but also it just you tell such good stories on it with your super calming voice. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, again, her name's Judy Grisell. If you guys have any questions, we're all reading the chat, but Megan and I actually came up with a bunch here, which hopefully encompasses some of the things that you guys are wondering or thinking about drug addiction. It's pretty pervasive. I mean, in any community, the gaming community especially, I think people overlook addictions. There's gaming addiction and substance addiction. A lot of people overlook alcoholism, even in the gaming industry as well. But I mean, sidestepping from that, music is a big part of Twitch now. And music historically has been kind of a place where, rock stars kind of binge on all kinds of drugs and other vices.
It's acceptable to be a drug addict as a musician.
Right. Yeah. It's a culture of it. My question regarding
overall though, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So I think over 20% of the adult population has a substance use disorder. That's not including the gaming or technology. So 1 in 5 or more. In the US, it's higher. and in much of Europe it's higher. It depends on countries, but it's certainly pervasive. 10,000 people every single day die from excessive substance use.
Wow.
So
Is that
not
including?
just rock stars, no.
Yeah. Wow. Is that including like, is that any sort of substance? Could that be, abusing nicotine, or, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of different things. There's so many addictions that you could have that it seems it's almost like part of daily life, to like have some sort of vice in some manner, to have like something that you're addicted to. I mean, caffeine addiction is such a common thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm talking about addictive drugs
Yeah.
that are harmful. So caffeine doesn't fall into that because caffeine's actually good for you. It protects against Parkinson's and cognitive decline and, a whole range of things. Unless you're pregnant or trying to get pregnant, copious amounts of coffee are actually beneficial. So no, I'm not talking about caffeine, but I am talking about nicotine and alcohol, so legal drugs, and also all illicit drugs, and marijuana is sort of in the middle now. But yeah, the from the consequences of excessive use, it could be in accidents, it could be in cancer, it could be in any direct. It's not suicide because we can't usually attribute that to substance use, but suicide rates are higher in people who use a lot of substances too. So I guess it's probably more than 1 in 5 adults.
Yeah, I remember reading your book. There was a statistic. Is it the second most prevalent deaths in the U.S. is due to substance addiction or overdosing?
Geez, I think preventable causes of death, it's the second highest. So it might even be the highest cause this now. When I wrote the book, probably it was 3 or 4 years ago. So by the time it came out, um, but I think that it's a leading preventable cause of death, and preventable assumes that there's a choice involved in using, and there's some debate about that, but we put it in that category. So unlike things like heart disease or stroke, which we don't have such clear, you're not colluding in those in the
Mm-hmm.
same way that you are self-administering addictive substances.
Right. Yeah. So going back to talking about addictive vices not pertaining to substances, is there a difference or a similarity in people using vices such as like hours of gaming or looking to, I mean, these are two different things like drinking sugary beverages, but something that's not uh, alcohol or nicotine that's classically
Hmm.
defined as a drug?
Yeah, so they're all addictive substances, and behaviors share a common neural pathway. And that pathway everybody's heard of, I think, involves dopamine in this mesolimbic circuit. And that is a small set of neurons that start in the sort of at the top of the brainstem, like at the top of the spinal cord, and go to the nucleus accumbens, which is uh, two nuclei, bilateral nuclei, on kind of right behind your eyes, a few inches in. And when dopamine is squirted out in the nucleus accumbens, it feels delicious. It feels kind of exciting, kind of titillating, as you would experience, especially early on in drug use. And it's the kind of excitement that also gaming brings on, and really the algorithms for a lot of uh, apps that are attractive to many people and sort
Hmm.
of illicit compulsive use are aimed at activating. So it's the plants were strategic in getting dopamine release, and it's a pathway that evolved to make us like sex and eating, really. And because if we like sex and eating, then we're likely to survive and we're likely to pass on our genes. So evolution design this pathway to make us enjoy those things. Every addictive drug exploits that pathway. by kind of substituting for sex and food. And actually, because we can control the dose and the frequency of administration and the potency by making these things in laboratories, it's even better than sex and food. So nicotine is brilliant at activating the pathway. Cocaine, and other stimulants, really great at it. But every addictive drug, including alcohol and THC, activate that pathway. So that's why they're addictive. And so do these things like gaming. It's the kind of thing like it's sort of like a surprise, or, something unexpected, or something like a treat. It's not just happiness, but it's more like a pleasure that is titillating in some way.
Huh. So like sort of like gambling too, and things that are
Gambling's perfect.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Donating
And
to your
so,
like favorite
Or
streamer. I guess.
donating to it's anything that could give you dopamine. It seems like our society is kind of built around that almost, in a way. It's like everything is
yeah,
kind
no, I don't think so. I don't think donating, is that what you said? I don't understand.
So on Twitch, you can give, because it's live, they can give you a lot of money, and a lot of people I would assume they kind of get that same sort of energy because it's somebody that they've watched on stream, so they've developed some sort of like friendship, or a parasocial relationship is, I think, the actual term for it. And so when they give a bunch of money and they see that joy on that, streamer's face, somebody that they've created that relationship with, they could have that same sort of impact. They could have that dopamine release of like, yay, I gave a bunch of subs. I gave $200 to this person. I met their donation goal, and now they're really happy and they're crying, when it helped them buy their house or whatever,
I don't know. Certainly the recipient of that $200 has a rise in dopamine. I'm not sure about the donor.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know it very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I take it like I would take gambling. I would think that the donor is kind of like betting on like, oh, she's going to be excited or happy, or like she's going to cry, and like you're kind of banking on this emotion that you want to see from this like live streamer. So, I mean, streaming is so new that I would be so interested in the research that comes out of parasocial relationships, addiction, and donating.
So one thing you can do, I think, is, for sure, the costs have to outweigh the benefits. And we were kind of about that with caffeine. So one determinant of addiction is that it has to take more than it gives you. So it has to compromise your life and well-being, not enhance it. If it enhances it, then we wouldn't say it's an addiction. So, you might have an addiction, so-called addiction to hiking or rock climbing or something, but unless it's causing you to get hurt over and over again, it's probably not classified as an addiction. So I think that, maybe in giving money to others, we're getting out of our, we feel altruistic. And if that indeed supports altruism, then I would say it's not addictive in the same way. Whereas if you're playing a video game, ignoring your studies, ignoring your relationships, ignoring your health and well-being, physical health and sleep, then you could see how this technology is compromising your well-being.
That makes
And
sense.
it would qualify.
Yeah. You can't just call any old thing an addiction unless it's harmful in some way on the
Right.
There's no
breathing we do all the time.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Yeah. So you in your book mentioned there's no free lunch. Can you kind of elaborate on that concept and what that means? Speaking of addictions.
Yeah. So here's another definition I've been thinking about lately. Addiction is evident when the good feelings, the good feelings you've borrowed from the future have to be paid back. and you're kind of out of them. So there's no free lunch, because what people are doing when they're using technologies or substances is they're naturally and understandably trying to enhance their sense of well-being. They're trying to feel better than average. That's what a couple of drinks does, or a nice joint, it feels terrific. But because of the fundamental ways that the brain works, the brain adapts to those enhanced states by producing the exact opposite state. So a hangover is sort of the payback for one too many the night before. And lethargy, or kind of feeling just a lack of energy, is a payback for a Coke binge or something. There's always a payback from a single use, but with chronic use, with chronically, because we can go talk to the dealer or stop at the store and buy as much of whatever it is we want as we want. So we chronically are trying to kind of stay in this elevated state. In that situation, the brain adapts so brilliantly that the drug stops working. And when you take the drug away, it produces kind of the opposite, strong opposite effect. And I guess it's easiest maybe to see with opiates. They produce this fabulous feeling of comfort and well-being and contentment. And with chronic use, they just help you to feel normal and not sick. But if you take the drugs away, then you do feel absolutely like you're suffering and miserable and completely discontent. You can't sit still, you can't sleep. So withdrawal from any drug is always the exact opposite as the effects that you took the drug for to begin with. And it's inevitable to all addictive drugs. So for me, marijuana made me feel like life was interesting. In fact, everything was interesting, kind of sparkly and funny and, I don't know, rich, I guess. And the more I smoked, the more boring life became without it. So that when I finally gave it up, it seemed to me like the universe was just black and white. There was no color, there was nothing funny, there was nothing interesting, there was nothing worthwhile. So I think, you take alcohol to make you relax, and it causes tension and insomnia. Whatever you take a drug to do, your brain produces the opposite effect. We're talking about psychoactive addictive drugs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And the classic, maybe more people could relate to nicotine. Nicotine's a great drug. It helps you relax and pay attention at the same time, which is just kind of perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But when people are regular smokers, they don't really get that out of it as much as they don't feel tense and having a difficult time concentrating. So really, they're buying all this nicotine only to feel normal.
Right.
That's what I mean by no free lunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was really interesting. One of the things you talked about was a sensitive dopamine receptor, I think, and how in one of your talks you were relating it to the first time you used alcohol and how it was like the most magnificent thing in the world, compared to how somebody who might not have that be as sensitive would feel different about that. Does that make sense? Am I getting that right?
No, I think it's a
Somewhere?
sensitive
Yeah,
dopamine
yeah.
receptor. We do. I don't think so. I think I might have been talking about endorphin release.
Yes. Yeah, let me find it. I know it was
It's
something.
okay.
Yeah.
I think the point you're making is a good
Oh, is
one,
it the
though.
limbic system between the sensitive dopamine pathway? Um, and then there was something about the limbic system between two places. You showed a picture of something. I'm sure I'm. Anyways, continue with what you're saying. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I think the
Yeah.
point you're
Yeah.
talking around is that not everyone is equally susceptible to developing a problem. So, for instance, you know, maybe a fifth of the people on the planet have a problem, but more than that, use. It's not like everybody who uses develops addiction and it ruins everybody's life. And there are social drinkers. My husband drinks alcohol and, basically could take it or leave it. That was not my experience. So when Raquel said at the beginning, I'm interested in the root causes, I think what really I'm interested in understanding what's different about the brains and the genetics of people like me who go on to become addicted and, kind of wreck their lives versus people who can use socially or casually and um, who don't self-destruct. And I think there are three domains for that. So after 30 years of research on this topic, I'm certainly haven't solved it. And there are thousands of neuroscientists around the world who are working on exactly this question. But I think that comes down to three things. There's a genetic liability. So about half the risk for developing substance use disorders comes from our inheritance, our genes. And it's not like there's one gene, a dopamine receptor or something. It's probably there's thousands of genes contributing tiny, tiny amounts. So it's really a complicated genetic contribution, but we know that half of your risk is determined kind of before you're born. And then certainly environmental influences play a big role. So one of the main reasons people pick up, which is usually in their adolescent time, is just for fun, just to be curious and see what happens. And I know that's why I took my first drinks at 13. And it was just really like, I was just wanted to experiment. I just wanted to have some fun. I kind of like experiments. That's why I'm a scientist today. But at the time, I was experimenting on myself. And I think, so access played a role, and my friends who were with me, I wasn't, by myself. Uh, Also, the culture and what's around, stress, trauma. And the third factor relates to those two, I think, is developmental exposure. So anytime an addictive drug is taken or put on the brain of a developing person. So from the time of conception, I guess, through 25 or so, it has a much more potent influence on the probability of developing disordered use. And so if you're less than 18, so let's say this, probably close to 90% of people who have a substance use disorder begin using before they're 18. If you start drinking alcohol before 18, you have a 1 in 4 chance of developing alcoholism. If you wait until you're 21, you have a 1 in 25 chance.
Wow.
So a dramatic shift. If everybody, which they won't, but if everybody, for instance, was prevented from using addictive substances until they were 26, let's say, rates of addiction would plummet, absolutely plummet. But because kids like me, some more than others, are prone to experiment, try new things, take risks, disobey, rules, they're also prone to try drugs. And this is a big part of why we have such an epidemic of destruction from addiction.
Yeah. I always wonder why, cavemen or our predecessors were driven, like some were driven to become more addictive to certain things versus others, like how that became a survival tactic.
I don't think it was a survival so I don't think there is any evidence that any cavemen were addicted. In fact, there's an argument, and I think it'd be hard to prove, but I think there's at least as much evidence for this than addicted cave people. The uh, we don't think there was much addiction before industrialization. So
Whoa.
people use drugs since the beginning of time,
Mm-hmm.
and probably before humans were humans, probably Neanderthals did, because uh, messing with your psychological states is kind of fun and interesting. So that's normal. It's a normal drive. And keep in mind, plants like poppy plants or something, or um, psilocybin, these things, I guess fungi aren't plants, but anyway, they developed mechanisms for messing with our minds so that for their own purposes, they weren't trying to help us out, they were trying to help themselves out through evolution, fitness. So we took these things, but we took them in rituals, we took them in groups, we took them in moderation and sort of special times. And I think that's lovely. I don't know if there's much maybe a Seder meal or, communion. There's not a lot of passing the pipe, I suppose, in a native culture, but mostly today we're using to get wasted. And more we're doing that in isolation. And that seems to be new. So the place where I was, which was, if I had a house, or an apartment, I was pulling the blinds and taking my drugs by myself. That's totally new. And that is, um, much more addictive use than the kind where, on a winter solstice, you're sitting in the cave and, thinking about your year with a little help. I don't think that's what's mostly going on now.
Yeah. I just find it interesting. There's some research out there with different species of animal, like for instance, dolphins getting high on like puffer fish or something like that. How this is kind of pervasive throughout the animal kingdom. Different species kind of self-administering or having sex for fun, for instance, like how that translates into us as
Yeah,
humans.
it's because it feels good. It feels good because if we don't have sex and we don't eat, it's not good for evolution. It's not good for the survival. And that's true for dolphin survival and bird survival. I mean, everybody has to have sex and eat. So the way evolution has ensured that is by making a pathway that reinforces it. We find those things pleasurable. It's when you're hungry and you eat, it's wonderful. It's really nice, and that's by design. These So that's the natural pathway. Now, because evolution is just so genius and inventive, there's lots of ways to activate that pathway. And all of those will be self-administered. I mean, birds will go after fermented berries, and cats like catnip, some of them. And I don't know about the dolphin thing, but it's not surprising because, right? If you think about the pleasure you get from food when you're hungry, or foreplay, sexual foreplay, that's the same idea with all of these compounds. So they're fun and also risky. And the risk comes from being able to deliver as much as we want when we want. So evolution did not account for the fact that you could buy cases of the stuff, or, you know, ounces of the stuff and just sit and smoke all day long. I mean, that's not, that wasn't what it's doing. And in some studies, people actually ignore food and sex because they're not quite as much fun as just me with my bag of whatever.
Your bag of tricks.
I'm curious, and I mean, you can go into as much detail or as little detail as you want. Something I found very interesting is the fact that you went to neuroscience, neurobiology, because you were an addict yourself. You are an addict yourself, or were, whichever one you want to use. And that's kind of what sparked your interest into doing the research, because you wanted to figure out how to sort of cure addiction, but and still be able to kind of, for the purpose to still be able to use. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you are. I think it's really just a bitch because I think people all over the world are coming to this question about, is my using enhancing my life or diminishing it? And which is winning in that. And it's just, this is the no free lunch. The more you use, the less likely it is to enhance, the more likely it is to diminish. So I kind of crashed and burned early. I um, by the time I turned 23, I had been kicked out of 3 schools. I had hepatitis from sharing dirty needles, and I was homeless often. So my life was like just a disaster. And I didn't actually think that was due to my drug use. This is one of the terrible things about substance use disorders. There's denial. So I somehow, I mean, this is what was in my head. The only good thing about my life was my drugs. It wasn't, and everything else was crap. My boss, my boyfriend, my whatever. Um, so nothing else was good but drugs. But I ended up in treatment sort of by mistake. That's a little unusual. And uh, they said, you're dying and you're killing yourself with these. If you keep going, you're going to die. So I'm 23, and they say, if you want to live, then you have to stop using. And I thought, I'm not sure. I mean, that doesn't sound like a good deal at all. The only good thing about my life is my drugs. So what are you saying? I mean, it seemed frankly like a toss up. So what I did, and I thought I was so clever. I wasn't so clever. If you could have seen me, I was a complete disaster. But I thought, there's always a back door. I was like most, kind of avid addicts. I had plenty of escape strategies, and had escaped a lot of close calls. And I thought, so they're giving me this ultimatum, but there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a back door. And so for some reason, probably because I have a proclivity for biology, I always liked biology when I went to school and studied, which wasn't all that often, but like in 8th grade, I loved biology. Um, so I figured, geez, if I have a disease that's going to kill me if I use, I'm just going to cure the disease and then I'll be able to use. And honestly, my goal at the beginning was to just be able to drop acid on Easter. I thought if I could once a year really have some serious fun, that would be enough. So I uh, ended up finishing. So it took me 7 years to get my undergrad. 7 years, it was kind of a lot of work and a lot of time, but I was persistent, as I, also learned to be kind of out on the street. And yeah, I was going to fix it. And it turned out that it's a lot more complicated than I thought.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean, the conclusion of your book. No spoilers, sorry, spoilers here. You realize that wasn't really a feasible plan at the end of the
Well,
day.
on the other hand, it did keep me sober, and my life is a billion times better than it was.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it didn't work, and I'm still at it. I'm still working in the research lab alongside thousands of other scientists, and we are learning about it. But yeah, I don't. I celebrated 34 years clean and sober.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny because our podcast is actually called Hi There. And the idea is to bring guests on who are kind of weed, marijuana friendly. And it's kind of like I guess, a euphemism to hello. But something that people don't actually talk about is like how serious marijuana addiction could be. And can you talk to us a little bit about why that is and what actually happens when you're a chronic weed smoker?
Sure, and I want to be careful because now I'm old, and I don't want to be like one of those, don't do this. But I guess what happened for me is I used all the drugs I could get everyone. Some I didn't even know what they were, and I just took them. I really loved to be out of it, and but marijuana was my favorite. It's sort of not as sloppy as alcohol, and it was just so damn fun in the beginning. I mean, it was just the best times of my life were stoned out of my mind. So I loved it, and but I smoked all the time, and kind of chain smoked. It was not as potent as it is today, so that was possible, and I kind of arranged my life around it. You know, I just I never, for instance, left the house without a couple of joints at all. I mean, I just didn't. So anyway,
Why
I
would
could
you?
go on and on. I do. I go on and on. Well, so what happened though was interesting because I guess eventually it just didn't work quite as well. So what mostly happened is the first hit of the day or so was kind of nice. And then after that, I was just smoking to stave off the incredible tedium of living, you know, of going to work, which is a pretty good job at the end. My last job was at this really fun raw bar on Deerfield Beach called Whale's Rib. You know, it was a great job. I worked for an alcoholic. I had, you know, everything was perfect, I guess. But I was really just so bored. And I have a really low tolerance for boredom. I would say, um, you know, I just, anything but boredom. Like, you know, I always wanted, no, I won't go on and on. But anyway, so it wasn't that fun anymore, honestly. It was just making life bearable. And uh, when I quit because cocaine was killing me. And the people at the treatment center said, you know, it's sort of all of a piece. So you got to kind of give up everything. I mean, it was awful. It was almost like going from driving around in a hovercraft to driving around in an old jalopy that had flat tires. You know, it was just uh, harsh and, you know, not at all fun, not what I was looking for. But about 4 or 5 months into it, the world started brightening up again. And so I said earlier, there's no free lunch because whatever you take the drug to do, your brain produces the opposite effect to sort of come out even. That's exactly what happened for me. I took the drug to make life interesting and rich and worthwhile, and life got really boring and really dull, so that I had to smoke to even do to enjoy anything. You know, there was no enjoyment without it. So now that's not true. You know, I have had amazing, great experiences that I could go on and on about, but I think so that's my experience. Now, what we know from the literature, if your audience is pro marijuana, is that um, THC has no proven benefits other than being uproariously fun in the beginning. It's not really helping anybody. It's not reducing anxiety. It's not reducing depression. In fact, there was a study that came out September 23rd, I think, showing that the more you smoke, the more depressed you are.
Whoa.
It induces psychosis for some people. I wasn't probably at risk, so you kind of have to be at risk. But a pretty big study with, I think, over many thousands of subjects and all around the world concluded by arguing that 40% of the new cases of schizophrenia, so the people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia today, 40% of those, you could attribute it to smoking high potency weed. Now,
Wow.
not everybody's vulnerable, but that's serious. It's a
Yeah.
really serious thing. It's also cognitive impairing. So it, and by empirical studies, so there's scientific evidence that it makes you mentally less sharp. That was totally true for me. So I think that psychosis, less sharp, more depressed, No medicinal benefits. So that is all, basically bullshit. That's not evident in any experimental, there's no evidence for it. I was just on a kind of a panel with a psychiatrist from Yale, and he, says the same thing. So I thought maybe I don't know the latest literature, but no, I do. There's no evidence. So I think it's fun in the beginning. I think like alcohol, if you can do it once in a while and get away with it, I'm all, bravo for you. It wasn't my experience. But if you're smoking every day and it stops working, there's hope on the other side.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I hear from dozens, hundreds probably, of people who are like me. People who started smoking in their teens and who are now living in their parents' basements and full of despair. And, they don't attribute it to smoking, but they, like me, smoking's the only thing that makes the cartoons interesting, but their lives are not really very full.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, and my audience is really curious on, there's been a lot of past research on marijuana helping with like things like multiple sclerosis or cancer patients. Is that sort of still the current paradigm where these patients are being administered like high potency medical grade marijuana, or is that kind of just like a thing of the past and this is a new research?
Yeah. So the thing about marijuana is there's hundreds of cannabinoids in marijuana, hundreds. The two most well known are delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol. So in marijuana, it's a different story. We definitely have shown, not me, but science has shown that cannabidiol has clear benefits for certain types, I think 3 types now of childhood onset epilepsy. And that is really a fabulous, wonderful thing because up until now, the option for these kids who were basically seizing to such an extent that their lives were ruined and their brains were also really damaged. The only option was to do surgery, take out big chunks of their brain. It's a tragedy, unbelievable. And cannabidiol does help with that, and it is approved, and it's really changing and benefiting a lot of people. So, or not a lot of people, but those people and their families, because what a terrible thing. Other than that, the evidence is very mixed, and especially because it's complicated if you think about it from a scientific perspective. If you give marijuana for someone who's got, let's say, MS pain or difficulty sleeping, what is you got a couple of questions. What's the proportion of THC, cannabidiol, and then maybe other things? But let's just say those two. That certainly would have an impact. And is it the THC that's having the benefit or the cannabidiol? Now, the entire recreational benefit of marijuana is due to THC. So it is necessary and sufficient for getting you stoned. So that's why I liked it, and that's why many people like it. Cannabidiol, in fact, doesn't have any of those mind-altering benefits. So I'd say let it go over the counter, sell it cheap. I think it'll definitely help people who are prone to certain kinds of epilepsy. Terrific. One of the problems is knowing what's in the marijuana. Another problem is acute effects of a drug and chronic effects of drug are very different.
Hmm.
So like acutely, antidepressants do nothing. If you feel depressed, you go to the doctor's office, it gives you an SSRI like Zoloft or something. That won't help you immediately. It takes chronic exposure, a few weeks to have a change. So the therapeutic benefit shows up over time. Well, if the therapeutic benefit shows up initially, it's likely that the brain will adapt. And so we don't know. For instance, some people say marijuana makes them less anxious. Some people say it makes them more anxious. Is that
Yeah.
due to differences in THC and cannabidiol, or is that due to differences in their individual neurobiology? We don't so much know. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say about, is this. Placebos, so sugar pills, work about close to 70% of the time on all
Wow.
kinds of stuff. They work on, enlarging your breast. They work on varicose veins. They work on headaches. They work on impotence. They work on, knee pain, back
Wow.
pain. I mean, they're powerful, powerful, powerful.
70% is
So
big.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's between 60 and 70. I mean, and so most people, most of the time, will respond to a placebo.
So if I think about my
So
boobs getting bigger, they might get bigger. Like if I take a pill.
exactly.
Wow. Okay, go
If
on.
you
That's
believe it.
crazy. Yeah.
So if you oh,
Yeah.
you have to believe it, Raquel, like so. And so this is the thing, I walk my dogs in the morning with these guys who are like all over, the effects of THC on this and that and their dog's mood and the dog, I mean, great, but let's have the science. This is sort of like where we are with COVID right now. We need to have the evidence in objective, clear measures and statistically relevant effects to know yes or no. This is science is not great for everything, but the wonderful thing about science is it tells us what's not true. And right now, if you don't have evidence, we have all the evidence we have about THC is it's harmful, not beneficial. Now, and I agree, it's fun as hell in the beginning at least. So I'm not, and it's probably not as harmful as alcohol. So, I'm not kind of a Puritan about it, but I guess each person has to ask the question, with a clear mirror, is this habit actually benefiting me or not? And in my case, it was definitely not.
So would you recommend if somebody wanted to, let's say, continue their habits in weed smoking or drinking, it's kind of just randomly and not everyday kind of habit versus like every single day
Yeah,
chronic use?
absolutely. So the more it works less well. Any addictive drug works less and less well. The except stimulants are a little bit of an exception, but that's a long story. So, but certainly marijuana, opiates, alcohol, um, nicotine. If you use them regularly and frequently and at high doses. The problem with THC compared to alcohol is the half-life. So for alcohol, if you don't want to develop a problem and you drink twice a week, which is not actually benefiting, probably, it's still, there's evidence that it increases the chance of cancers and other things. So it's not like it's helping you, but maybe the harm is low. Twice a week's good because probably 12 hours after you have your drink, there's zero alcohol left in your system. So your body can recover and adapt back into a normal state. But with THC, it hangs around so long that infrequently needs to be even less frequent than that.
Hmm. The half life to THC, did you mention what it was?
Well, it varies depending on
The dose.
proportion of body fat because it's so lipophilic. So it loves fats, and we're basically our brains are fat. We're fatheads, and our some of us more
Mhm.
than others have a lot of fat in us. So it kind of hangs out for a long time. So it's much longer.
So
Much longer.
theoretically, a person with less body fat, it would not be in their system as long as someone
Right.
with more body fat. Oh,
That's right.
Or women in general would then hang on to that THC in their bodies more commonly than
Longer.
men, just because, women have less muscle, more fat.
Exactly.
Cool. Megan, if you didn't have any other questions, I wanted to kind of dive into psilocybin a little bit. we've been.
No, go for it. If you have a final question, I think we're getting up to
Just
an
to go
hour.
back about
Mhm.
this for a second, the half-life of THC is about 20 hours.
Oh, that's a
So
long
20
time.
to 30 hours.
Yeah.
And if you smoke regularly, then it gets really stored in the fat because you never can, it kind of builds up over time. And so then it's about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So that shows you there's a relationship between the frequency of use, the dose, and the half-life. And so if you can picture um, kind of a rising slope, every time it starts to metabolize away, if you're taking it again, you didn't get back to the
Yeah.
bottom, then yeah. So basically, for me, I guess, it probably took a good few months to get it out of my system.
Yeah, I remember just real quick, how long did it take for you to, like, when you stopped smoking weed, how many years or how many months were you like, okay, wow, I don't actually miss smoking joints anymore?
It's a terrible story. I hate to say it because I think it's really discouraging.
I'm really
So,
diving deep here.
I uh, I decided to change my life to try to clean up because I was going to die pretty soon. And so I thought I'm going to just stay clean for a few years. I'm going to solve addiction and then I'll be able to use less destructively. It took me
Sounds like
about
a perfect plan.
it was a perfect plan. I'm still working on it. It took 14 months before I didn't want to drink, and I didn't even really like alcohol, but I was pretty darn dependent. I was not used to showing up for life. It took over 9 years before I didn't feel deprived from not being able to smoke. And I think I'm an outlier. I really can't tell you how much I loved marijuana. Um, and I'm not trying to get other people. I know that what ended up happening for me is that the only thing that made my life worthwhile was being wasted. I couldn't get that wasted. I was just sort of dull and stupid. Um, and I spent a lot of time just with me and my bong, and I think, uh, what I've done since quitting, gotten a PhD, traveled all over the world, lived in Italy for a year, swum in the Arctic Ocean, biked up in the Arctic Circle, bicycle. I mean, I've swam at Copacabana. I mean, I've done a billion. I had my daughter with no meds. I don't know, million great things. And I don't think, if I was getting my joys from the pipe, I don't think I would have had 1/10 the life that I've had.
Hmm. So, in a way, it kind of gave you a more colorful memory of what actually happened.
No, I mean, all those, I don't think that at all. So all those things happened since I got clean.
Oh,
So
oh,
in a
sorry.
way, so what I'm saying is
Yeah.
by putting down the drug, my
Yeah.
life has been a million times more colorful,
Got it.
which is
Yeah.
so ironic, right? Because I used because I like the color,
Right.
and then the color dissipated, and then I quit, and my life is full of color
Yeah.
again.
Um, yeah, before we dive into psilocybin, I wanted to, you were mentioning how you were kind of an outlier. Um, I mean, I feel like everything you kind of did was to an extreme. Like, if you had a coke binge, it was like all of it in one night and then more the next day. Or like if you were smoking weed, it was like bong rip every 5 minutes. Would you say like most
Mhm.
addicts are kind of super extreme in that sense, or would you say it's kind of a spectrum where most people kind of sit here and you're kind of addictive, but you're not? Like, would you consider yourself an extreme version of an addict?
Consider myself a typical one. So I do
Wow.
think there's a tendency to be that way. And that's now what made me especially extreme was that I was young. So teenagers and, you know, adolescents, I guess, are more extreme, also by design. It's really good. I mean, if you had a bunch of really conservative, um, cautious teens, frankly, we would be, you know, not as far advanced as a society. So, people who are extreme help push the rest of us along, in good ways often. And they also, that extreme makes you say, you know what, I'm going to go live in Montana, or I'm going to go teach myself something. I mean, I think that tendency is good. So because I was young, I was extreme. Because I was using, I kind of thwarted my cognitive development, so I stayed sort of extreme. And because I feel like when I can eventually figure this out, my genetics and neurobiology were perfectly suited to THC. As I said, I tried every drug I could get. I liked them, most of them. But I really, really loved smoking. And I think I didn't get anxious. I didn't get, it was a good drug for me. So I think that that's partly why I missed it. Also, for instance, I love live music. I follow the Grateful Dead and, now follow Fish. And, a lot of people are smoking at those things. And so, um, it was all wrapped up in a lifestyle that was hard to give up. And in fact, I follow Fish now still, and I don't miss the weed anymore. But if we can ever get back to live music, which would be great. But I think, it was just a big sacrifice for me. So, and I would say, sometimes it still crosses my mind. Oh my gosh, wouldn't this be fun to be high? But I know that I'm the kind of person, this is answering your question, that would also like to do it on Tuesday mornings because that would make those a little more interesting. And, maybe my husband's, story that I've already heard 6 times, a little less boring. So I don't know. I don't do it
Yeah.
because I'm probably not, there's this thing about saying to an alcoholic, people say this to me all the time, don't you want just one glass? Shouldn't you just have a glass of wine? Well, frankly, no, because who wants a glass? It's just lame. It's like microdosing. Why microdose? Take a
Yeah.
dose, or don't.
Yeah.
It's the extremes. Yeah, that makes sense. Raquel, did you have a quick question about mushrooms? We're nearing in on the hour. We have
Yeah, it
about
was a
5 minutes.
good segue into microdosing. How do
Yeah.
you think that applies to depression, or do you think that's a good way to kind of solve addiction for some people, and why is that?
So I just want to say, first of all, the psychedelics, which do not include MDMA, do not include ecstasy in the way I divide it, which is as a pharmacologist. Um, but they do include LSD, psilocybin, DMT or ayahuasca, and mescaline. Those drugs are not addictive, according to the classic criteria. Now, now people can get addicted to placebos. So we're nuts, as human beings. And I'm not saying, they couldn't, but neurologically, pharmacology, they're not addictive. Are they harmful? Well, for some people, yes. So it can bring on psychosis and schizophrenia. It's a serious risk. But they also might be beneficial. And I think maybe were beneficial for me, actually. And I think that there are great studies now, controlled experiments happening at good places like the University College in London or Johns Hopkins or I think NYU, that are investigating therapeutic benefits. And in a nutshell, since we have a minute left, it's an antidote to neuroticism, and neuroticism is kind of people who are overly absorbed by themselves. So we could go on about that, but that is a problem in the world and in individual lives. And so in the right context. Now, I do not think that on top of your regular weed habit and your copious amounts of alcohol and whatever else you're doing, you're going to fix yourself with LSD. Unfortunately, that's pretty rare, if at all. So I would say try to get in a clinical trial if you're depressed or anxious or can't stop thinking about yourself, or get a volunteer job.
So I guess I'm talking about microdosing, and you're talking about generally any psychedelic, microdosing any psychedelic you wouldn't think contributes to kind of curing
You
that.
know, I don't know. I think the studies need to be done. So
Mm,
I'm open-minded about that.
hmm.
I absolutely support all research and all investigation, collecting data, finding out. And there's no reason not to do these studies, except that we need more funding at NIH. But let's get it done. Yeah, let's find out.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Judy, for coming on and talking to us for the past hour. If you guys don't know who Judy Grisel is, she's a behavioral neuroscientist with an expertise in pharmacology and genetics, and her research focuses on determining the root causes of drug addiction. So for the past hour, we've kind of just been piddling around those topics. Judy, is there anything we should know about you, or is there anything that you're releasing or trying to promote currently?
Well, book Never Enough is my last book, and I'm working on a new one, but it's a while from being released. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
come back on when that comes out.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, definitely check out Never
Yeah.
Enough. Can't recommend it more to my people than just go read it. It's a really interesting read. A lot of neuro talk as well for you neuro nerds out there. Yeah, Judy, we'd like to have you again at some point if you'd be down for that. But thank you so much again for your time today.
You're welcome, guys. Bye-bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
That was such a cool conversation. It is always really interesting having people that can give us the negative side effects of marijuana.
Yep.
You know,
Because we're always kind of talking about why it's so much fun. I mean, obviously, it's a lot of fun. Clearly.
I mean, it makes sense. Everything in the world has a a positive and a negative effect. You know,
Right.
there isn't cause and effect to everything. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
heck yeah. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Who do we have on the podcast next week? Do we know?
Great question. Cheese?
It might be. Let's see. Do we got Cheese on the podcast next week? I'm excited to talk to him. He's one of the nicest people that we've ever had. No, next
We're
week
taking
we
a
have
break and then we have
a
cheese.
quick break.
Yeah.
Yes,
Next week,
on the
no
29th.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was a really interesting talk. No one ever talks about the negatives of marijuana, which is exactly why I wanted to bring her on. I was like, no one ever, it's such pop culture now. Like, weed's becoming, I'm so like against the grain of society that the more popular weed gets, the more I'm like, it's not that cool anymore. I mean, I still smoke, obviously.
You fucking hipster.
I know. I hate it. I can't change that about myself. You're talking to the girl who incessantly dyes her hair purple just to say fuck you to society subtly. I don't fucking know. Yeah. So, yeah, that was a really interesting talk. I love though how we concluded with the fact that psychedelics are not addictive. I'm like, oh, think.
That makes a lot of sense.
Jesus, it does.
I feel like they're too traumatic, like in all aspects. Like it's just a very overwhelming experience when you take like a full dosage of psychedelics that it makes your brain not want to abuse it, you know?
Yeah, but beyond that, it's like the biochemical effects of it. Just like it's not going to fuck up any of your pathways. It's not going to downregulate like just like how marijuana like downregulates the receptors of cannabinoids in your brain. Like it's not going to do any of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that we know because
so far.
Yeah, that's the tough thing that is from what I know about drug research is that because so much of it isn't legal, they can't really study it, and like they don't really know because they can't study it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed with that. Especially with psychedelics, like I mean, for years still. People are doing clinical research and that's about it, or clinical trials, and that's all people can do.
Very much so.
Yeah, I would say that my family definitely has a streak of addiction. I don't know if I always teeter between like, oh, I'm definitely an addict. I'm definitely in that category. But then I meet people like Judy who are like, yeah, if I have cocaine in my hand, like I have to snort the entire bag. And then after that, it's not enough, which is why her book is called Never Enough. Like it's literally like, and every time I think like, yeah, I'm definitely an addict, I'm like, I stopped at 2 beers yesterday and I didn't want any more just because I didn't want to.
No, you're incredibly controlling. Like you're not.
See, I wouldn't, I don't know. Like I don't, it depends on what it is. So I don't know. I think that's why I was trying to ask her if there's like selective addiction where some people are like super addicts or if you're like kind of an addict. And I guess like the addict that she's talking about is like the kind of person she is.
I think you just enjoy it. I don't think you have an addictive personality. I think you just enjoy the feeling, so you do it. Like you,
The recreational
you use it.
part. Yeah.
Yeah, like you enjoy it, and because you live a life where you can recreationally use all the time, it allows you to just be able to do it. But you don't. I wouldn't say you, because like I think about before we play shows, always the day of a show, you like won't smoke with me at all, and I'm always like, what the fuck? Like it's the morning, like always like a few hours before, but you're like, nah, dude, I don't, and that's like even more of like. It makes me worry about my addictions, but it does make me think like somebody that's addicted to marijuana or have an addictive personality wouldn't be able to do that. They wouldn't be able to say, no, I'm not going to smoke all day because of this thing that I think it might actually help.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. Reckless saying, I microdose. Does it help? It does help with the depression. Yeah. I mean, she didn't say that it didn't is the thing. It's like right now that's all super new. But yeah, mostly we talked about weed and alcohol and nicotine. I think those were the top 3 drugs that we were referring to. I mean, not to mention like all opiates too. It's a pretty good argument to make for everything that we said today.
Very much so. I don't know. Do you want to call it a short podcast today, Raquel? Or do you want to talk shit for half an hour?
I mean, I'm pretty good. I think that was a lot.